Morning came quickly at Jerusalem University College. There is something about waking inside the old city that never quite feels ordinary. Even before opening my eyes, I could sense it, the thickness of history in the air, the stillness that feels layered rather than empty. Stone holds memory, and here the stones seem to remember everything. When I did open my eyes, the light was already filtering through the window, soft, golden, diffused by the pale Jerusalem stone outside. Somewhere nearby, a door closed gently. Footsteps echoed faintly in a hallway. A distant bell rang. And then, almost underneath it, voices. Not loud, not intrusive, just present. Jerusalem was awake. We gathered after breakfast in one of the meeting rooms at JUC. It was a simple room, wooden chairs, a long table pushed to one side, a window that looked out over rooftops and trees, and if you leaned just right, the faint line of the valley below. Everyone seemed a little quieter that morning. Palm Sunday was still lingering, the palm branches and praises, the reality of the coming Friday. It hadn't resolved into anything neat. It had simply settled. Francis stood near the window. He waited until we were all seated. Then he said, almost conversationally, "Today we go underground." A few of us smiled faintly, not because it was funny, but because it felt right. Holy Week had already begun to descend. "We're going to walk through Hezekiah's tunnel," he continued. He let that sit for a moment. "It was built during a time of siege," he said. "The Assyrian army was advancing. Jerusalem's greatest vulnerability was its water supply. The Gihon spring lay outside the city walls." He paused, then gestured gently with his hand. "So Hezekiah ordered something extraordinary." His eyes moved from one of us to another. "They carved a tunnel through solid rock." He held up two fingers from two directions. That caught everyone's attention. "Two teams," he said, one starting at the spring, one starting from inside the city. They worked toward each other without modern tools, without precise instruments, guided by sound, by instinct, by persistence. Just a moment. Okay. Liam leaned forward slightly. "How did they know where to go?" Francis smiled. "They didn't," he said simply. A small pause. "They listened." He moved a little closer to the table. "There is an inscription," he said, "left by the workers. It describes the moment they finally heard each other's voices through the rock, and then broke through." He tapped the table lightly. "After cutting over 500 meters through stone, they met." Silence. Not the kind that comes from confusion, the kind that comes from awe. Francis' tone shifted just slightly. "That tunnel," he said, "was about survival." Another pause. "Hidden work, hard work, work no one would see once it was finished." He let that linger. Then he said very gently, "Today's station is the third fall." The words settled into the room. No one needed explanation. We all knew what that meant now. Francis looked at us one by one, and then he said, "Friends, ask yourselves, when I feel that I have exhausted my efforts in surmounting a challenging trial, what do I do? Do I relent, resign, retreat? Do I ask myself whose will I am seeking? Do I look to the Lord for guidance, wisdom, strength? When I am powerless to take another step, do I trust in Jesus to carry me the rest of the way?" No one spoke. He stepped back slightly. "Hold those questions," he said, "and don't try to answer them too quickly." We didn't talk much as we left. The walk from JUC to the city of David is not long, but it changes you. You begin on Mount Zion, surrounded by stone buildings, narrow streets, quiet corners, and then, gradually, you begin to descend. The ground slopes, the air shifts, the sounds change. We walked down toward the Kidron Valley, the city opening around us in layers. Olive trees scattered along the hillside, ancient walls rising in quiet strength, the light catching on stone in a way that feels almost deliberate. I pushed my walker carefully, watching the uneven ground. Beside me, David walked quietly. Ahead, I could see Mom and Dad moving slowly, still holding hands, savoring their final week together. Francis walked near them, his stride exemplifying the simple movement of the day. Claire was nearby, silent as always, her presence steady rather than noticeable. And all around us, Jerusalem, not as a backdrop, but as something alive. The entrance to Hezekiah's tunnel isn't dramatic. There's no grand doorway, no announcement, just a place where water begins. We gathered near the Gihon spring. The air was cooler there, damp, the faint sound of water moving through stone. A large group of boys was there at the same time we were. Their leaders each had a rifle slung across his back, a requirement in the city that seemed to always be under threat of attack. It was hard to get used to, but at the same time, it felt comforting, safe to know that we weren't just sitting ducks. Francis didn't say anything more. He simply nodded. And then we stepped in. The first thing I noticed was the water, cool against my feet, not deep, but enough to make every step intentional. The second thing was the darkness, not complete, but close enough. Light filtered in from behind us and somewhere far ahead, but in between it dimmed, softened, narrowed. The walls pressed in, not claustrophobic, but close, very close. The ceiling at times was low. I wondered if my walker would fit through the entire tunnel or if I'd get stuck at some point. I imagined myself blocking everyone, people having to back up for me to get out. But Francis had been here before and he hadn't said anything. I decided to trust his judgment. The tunnel isn't straight. It winds, curves, shifts direction unexpectedly. You don't walk through it so much as follow it. At first, there was a kind of quiet excitement, careful steps, soft laughter, someone commenting on the water temperature, the novelty of it. But that didn't last long because after a while, it's just walking. The ground beneath the water isn't even. You can't see where your foot will land. You have to feel your way, step by step, slowly, carefully, and the light doesn't get better. It gets ambiguous, enough to see shapes, not enough to see clearly. I became aware of my breathing, not because I was afraid, but because everything else had quieted. The sounds of the city were gone, no voices from outside, no wind, just water, footsteps, breathing. I thought about what Francis had said. They listened. In here, that made sense. You couldn't rely on sight. You had to trust something else. I reached out once, touching the wall beside me. Solid rock, cool, unyielding, and yet someone had carved through it from both directions without seeing, without knowing exactly where they were or whether they would actually meet up, just continuing. The questions came back, not as thoughts, as something deeper. When I am powerless to take another step, I stepped again, carefully, uneven ground, water shifting, balance adjusting. No one was talking now, not because we had been told not to, but because there was nothing to say. Time changed in there. It didn't pass the same way. There were no markers, no landmarks, just movement. At one point, someone stumbled slightly ahead. Not a fall, just a misstep. A hand reached out, steadying, no words, just continuing. And that was it. That was the experience. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just enduring. I realized something then. This wasn't about danger. We weren't in danger. It wasn't about being seen. No one could see us. It wasn't about approval. There was nothing to approve. It was about something else, something quieter. It was about continuing when nothing in the environment was helping you. and when no one was cheering you on. No view, no encouragement, no sense of progress. Just step, step, step. And somewhere in that, I understood the third fall, not the first where shock still carries you, not the second where you still have some strength to rise with effort, but the third when there is nothing left. And still, Jesus goes on. The light ahead began to grow, slowly, gradually, not suddenly, and then we emerged. The pool of Siloam. The space opened. Air moved differently. Light returned, not harsh, but real. Water widened. Stone steps. Open sky. Outside the current old city walls built by the Ottoman Empire. Inside the city of David walls. The water had come in safely, almost miraculously during the reign of Hezekiah, during the siege. No one spoke. We stood there for a while, not looking at each other, just standing. And then, eventually, we made our way back to JUC. The walk back felt different. The same path, the same stones, but something had shifted. We didn't try to explain it. After dinner, we gathered together, the same room, the same chairs, but not the same people. Each of us was changed. Francis didn't begin. He waited. Liam spoke first. I didn't expect it to be like that, he said. No one asked him to explain. We knew. It wasn't hard, he continued, but it wasn't easy either. Francis nodded slightly. Sean leaned forward. I kept waiting for something to happen, he said, like a moment. He shook his head, but it was just walking. Yes, Claire said quietly. Dad spoke next. It reminded me, he said slowly, of times when you just keep going. He looked down briefly. Not because you feel strong, but because stopping isn't an option. Mom's hand found his. She didn't speak. She thought of how stopping wasn't an option when she had lost him. David added quietly, There's no applause in there. A faint smile, and no one watching. No, Francis said. I found myself speaking. It's strange, I said, because nothing about it was dramatic, and yet it felt important. I searched for the words. It felt like something I've lived through before. Heads nodded. Francis looked around the room, and then he said, You noticed it was not dangerous. A pause. But it was not easy. He folded his hands. Most of what forms us, he said, is like that. Silence. Then very gently, he falls again. No elaboration, none needed. We sat there for a long time. No resolution, no conclusion, just the quiet understanding that some parts of the cross, of our crosses, don't look like suffering. They look like a narrow path, water at your feet, darkness around you, and the simple, steady decision to keep going.